Well, some of you know my story. I had the privilege of living in Seattle, Washington for about 6 years. And I learned a whole lot of things about life in Seattle. Honestly, I learned a ton about myself. I learned so much about the earth. And this is what's really trippy is that seasons are real. Now, I grew up in Houston. I didn't know that. I thought that there was days. I didn't know that there were seasons. You go to bed, it's like 90 degrees. You wake up, it's 20 degrees. And then while you were sleeping, winter. I didn't understand that there was a progression. And the thing that even blew me away to even a bigger degree was the fact that there are actually sports. I mean, this is real. There are sports that are created to be enjoyed within every season. The Winter Olympics, I mean, that's real. It's not a facade. Snow is real. Real snow. Not just it snowed and there's a flake on your windshield. And people are tweeting, taking pictures of it. It's on Instagram. We're playing in the snow, and it's like a hand with a couple of flakes in it. They're like, it's snow. That's not snow. And when I lived in Seattle, I experienced snow. Winter, a real winter. It was mind-blowing, but something you got to understand about Seattle is that it rains a lot there because it's at sea level, but just 30 miles away from the city, it dumps snow. So every time it rains in the city, it's snowing on the mountain. And so a way that you begin to kind of cope with the raininess is that you go skiing. That's what you do. You escape into the mountains. It's a really hard life. And so I decided that I was probably a natural snowboarder. I had just grown up in the wrong city. If I had grown up in Seattle, I would probably be not here right now. I would be on my way to Russia for the Olympics. They're getting ready to start. Right? That's just what I thought in my mind is that I'm a natural. I just grew up in the wrong place. So I need to go ahead and begin to snowboard and realize my potential, And so I started this snowboarding journey. And we would go to the mountain and we would learn and we would kind of cruise down and we would go often, about every weekend. And so you kind of start progressing and getting a little bit better and a little bit better. And before long, I was decently proficient, making my way down the mountain. I'm not falling anymore. I'm able to turn. I feel in control and not out of control. Has anybody ever snowboarded before? That's a big breakthrough. When you start feeling like I'm in control of what's going on right now, I'm not just along for the ride and hoping I don't break something. And this thing began to happen, this magnetic pull started kind of pulling me towards this area of the mountain that is known as the Terrain Park. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Terrain Park, let me just break it down for you very quickly. The Terrain Park is the area of the mountain where they have sat in rooms and devised things that they call features they're made to break you. They think, how can we break somebody's body? And then they come up with that and they put it on the mountain and they tease you with it with these three dudes that know how to do it. And they're wearing pink pants and a lime green jacket and everything is new on them. And they got cool goggles that cost like $5,000. But you don't know that. You just look at them and you say, I want to be you. And so I'm observing just this radness that's going on in the Terrain Park, oblivious of what it costs to actually get there. And I'm just thinking, you know what? That's where I belong. That's me, So I got a bright blue jacket to try to fit in, I embrace the neon colors. And I get on the chairlift that is designed to take you to the top of the Terrain Park. Okay, now, very different than a normal chairlift. Immediately I begin to see things unique about the Terrain Park. okay? One is there's warning signs on the chairlift. They say things like, look before you leap. Sign your waiver. And I should have been cluing in, this is probably not going to be okay. There's some pain awaiting me. But of course I did what every other dude would do, and I just ignored it and acted like I'd been there a million times. Now, I got to the very top of the terrain park, and there's this little snow tent, and I went inside of it to sign my life away. Basically, you do have to sign a waiver, and they give you a special little badge that says that you've gone through this safety course so that if you die, it's on you. And I did all this stuff, and I should have been thinking this, I should have, clued in a little bit that not only were there warning signs, everything was different at the terrain park. For instance, nobody was nice. On the bunny hill, everybody is friendly. Everybody's wearing their little resort jacket. They're there to help you. There's about 400 people waiting for you to come down the chair, smiling. We're so glad you're here. Let me help you with that. At the terrain park, no one smiles. No one's happy. It's like the Too Cool for School police have taken over this area of the mountain, and everyone acts like that they don't have any friends and they don't want to have any friends, and it's about how cool can I look and project myself. That was the vibe. So it's not conducive to new people getting answers to questions. There was just one sign that said, look before you leap. I don't know what that meant. But I learned. Because I went up to the very beginning of the run, and there's this little blue line that they painted. You feel just like you're at the X Games. There's this blue line that you painted, and I'm sitting at the blue line, and I'm just kind of watching everything happen, and guys would slide up to it, and they would be like, next, and jump into the transition and go to approach the first jump that they call a kicker. And so, everyone's just like sliding up. They'd adjust their buckles, kind of, adjust their pants a little bit, pull their jacket down, goggles, make sure the beanies flap just enough, and they'd be like, next, and then they hit down. And these dudes just made it look beautiful. They are coming off this jump, flying through the air. People are screaming. Babies being thrown in the air. Gold medals are being awarded at landing. And I'm thinking, this is my moment. I was made for this, And so I slide up to the blue line. I do exactly what they did. Tweak my buckles, pull my pants down a little bit, pull the sleeves down, check the beanie, ready, set, next. Slide in. Now, this is where things started going tragically wrong relatively quickly. Because those transitions are really steep. Because what I didn't understand is that you need speed. Speed actually is your friend in the terrain park. At this stage in my snowboarding game, I was not into speed. I was into easy style it, just bend at the knees with ease as you just cruise, you know what I mean? And here I am in this like steep transition flying towards this kicker, and it's crazy, man. They had these little people that you couldn't see from the top, but the closer you got to the kicker, they start making it bigger. They're piling snow on, it's as a joke. Y'all are looking at me like, they have little people there that put snow on it? No, that's supposed to be a joke. That y'all were supposed to laugh when I said little people, but y'all got really nervous that there was actually little people working there. All right, relax. Okay, that's not real. That was a joke. If you went to a resort where that happened, please tell me, because I want to go. But the closer I get to this jump, the bigger this thing starts to look. And by the time I get there, it looks like 100 feet tall, I'm thinking this thing is humongous. It was probably about 3 or 4 feet tall in all honesty, but it looked huge. Now I'm flying down this transition, and I'm getting nervous about the speed, so I start to speed check. Rule number 1, never speed check. Don't do that. You need your speed. Because if I would have followed the signs that said, look before you leap, I would have realized that there is this large gap, this just pit of despair that was awaiting me on the other side of this jump. And this big space, this big flat, sketchy death zone led to this area that is known as the knuckle. Okay, and the knuckle is where things go. This is where people get broke. Because if you don't have enough speed to clear the knuckle, you don't get to enjoy the nice slope that they've created that all those guys that went before me made look so easy. They just launch off the kicker and they'd land on that slope, and it was just like butter, just like, woo, just warm butter on toast, just wow. But if you hit the knuckle, there was nothing smooth or buttery or beautiful or anything like toast that you experience. And so here I come, and I launch off the front of this jump, and you would have thought, I mean, I kid you not, I wish I was exaggerating right now, but I am not. This is a true story. You would have thought that I was in a car in a state of an emergency, and I had to roll both windows down on the driver's side and the passenger side at the exact same time because my arms are flying like this, right? Now, if that wasn't enough, I turn my snowboard, I'm facing this way now, and I have definitely got this weird pumping motion going. I mean, all kinds of, cool left the building. And I look down and I realize I am destined to slam on the knuckle right now. And as I'm looking and I get closer and closer and closer, I smack the knuckle with a vengeance. And in an instant, my snowboard transforms into a rocket launcher. And it shoots me through the air. And I hit the snow and I am falling. Just tumbling. And everything that could have come off my body flew off my body. Gloves, goggles, beanie. It looked like a garage sale had exploded all over the place, and I'm laying in the middle of it, and all my stuff is surrounding me. And the best part about it is that people at the top are saying, "Get out of the way." And so I look, I'm like, I just died. Go around me, you know what I mean? And so I like gathering all my stuff. I'm like kind of hobbling and sliding, trying to get out of the way. And I just kind of make my way, just slowly, snow in my face, on my nose. And here's another thing that doesn't look like it on TV. Snow is cold. My face is burning, everything hurts, and I'm just sliding, get right in my car. And I'm sitting in my car, and I'm like, man, that did not go as planned. But I was committed. I was like, I'm a natural. I just had a bad day. I'm a natural at this. So I kept doing this. I kept going up the chair and hucking my body off of this jump, thinking that I was going to have a different outcome. And this interesting thing happened. This guy started going to our church. His name was Daniel. Daniel's a great snowboarder. And so he took me snowboarding one day, and we went to the terrain park. And Daniel's one of those guys that makes it look real easy, and he's just kind of flying around. And he watches what I do, my big circus act. He's seeing that. And he says, "Hey, you know what, Jady? The issue that you are experiencing in your landing has nothing to do with your takeoff. It actually has everything to do with how you're reacting in the mid-flight. The chaos of your mid-flight is determining not if you're going to land, not where you're going to land. It's determining how you're going to land." And isn't that a little bit like life, for real? In life, a lot like this, we're in that middle place. You know where you are, and oftentimes we can pretty clearly see where we want to be. But most of our everyday life is in that middle spot No foundation, no security. It's scary. It's desperate. It can be lonely. And we start doing things that we don't naturally think we're going to do because we're desperate to grab something solid, but we're in the mid-flight chaos. Mid-flight chaos. I mean, think about life. There's so much chaos in life. Relationships. Let's just take being single. I know a lot of people that are like, I know where I am. I desperately want to be married, but I know where I am, but I know where I want to be. I don't really know how to do this part, though. I don't understand when I hear people say, like, thrive in your singleness. You're like, they must be lying to me right now because it feels like chaos. It feels fearful. It feels anxious. I don't want to be here. I want to be here. But guess what? Right now I'm here and I don't know how to be here. And in this spot, it's fear-filled. It's desperate. It's discouraging. We can get distracted even about where we're going. We can lose sight of how to thrive where we are because we get so focused on where we want to be, we're so overwhelmed with where we're not, that chaos becomes distracting. I mean, how many seniors in the house, right? Looking for a job. Daddy's taking the credit card in May. Holy. Things get scary. What's going to happen? You need a job. You know where you need to be. You know where you want to be. You might even have your dream job. You might even have that company that you want to work for, the hospital that you want to work for, the med school you want to get into, the graduate school program that you desperately want to be a part of. You see it, but right now you're right here. You have no idea what in the world is going on. You can't get a job. You can't get an interview. You got rejected by the school that you wanted to get. Chaos. Chaos. I mean, how about just in our relationship with God? We know sometimes very clearly what we are not in our relationship with God. We become very crystal clear about where we are. Sometimes we see where we want to be. You see somebody that you admire and you're like, man, I want to love God like them. Or you have an experience with God. You're like, I want to live in that place of security and confidence. But right now, all I feel is just anxiousness and discouragement. I'm overwhelmed about where I'm not. And I don't even really know how to get there. There's this giant in the Bible. His name's Paul. He's just this incredible theologian. I love reading the writings of Paul. Paul says something very interesting in Philippians 4. Philippians 4, he helps us understand what we're to do in this mid-flight chaos. He says this in verse 6. Don't be anxious about anything. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. Be anxious about nothing. I mean, you read this. Don't be anxious. And honestly, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? You're like, thanks, Paul. That's a good word. How in the heck am I supposed to do that? You ever read passages of scripture and you're like, that is so right. I have no idea how that happens, but that is so right. I mean, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, man, this is right. The Bible is right. And you're like, I don't know how in the world I'm supposed to do that, but it feels good to read it. And be honest with you, that's kind of how I felt about this passage for years and years and years. I would read that and something in my soul would resound with it, but I had no practical idea of what in the world it would mean to not be anxious about anything. Because if I'm honest with you, when I'm in this mid-fight place right here, when I'm in the chaos, the moment of everything's going crazy, and I'm flailing my arms and kicking my legs, and there is nothing solid, there's no solid foundation that I'm standing on, and everything that I want to be starts looking like it's further away, and I'm nervous, scared, and fearful, I am everything but not anxious. I'm extremely anxious, actually. So how do we do it? How do you become anxious about nothing when most of our life is lived in this middle place where the greatest temptation is anxiety? It's worrying about how in the world I'm going to get to where I want to be. How do we live with no fear, with no discouragement, with no disappointment when the mid-flight chaos of our daily lives pushes us into those emotions? What do we do? How do we respond? Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the note. But how does that actually get into my heart? I'm just so thankful that the Bible is filled with stories of people who are just like me and you. And this dilemma of trying to figure out how in the world do we experience the peace of God that transcends all understanding, that rules in our hearts and our minds, that same peace, how do we experience that in the middle of the chaos? How does this chaotic middle place become not just an in-between place? How does it become a place where we actually will begin to refer to it as the peace in between place? How does this become a spot to where we can learn to thrive in process and not just hope to survive the process? Well, the encouraging thing for us is that this is not new. This dilemma did not start with our generation. This idea, this anxiety, this fear in the middle place, this didn't even start in the 80s, y'all. I mean, you got to reach way back. Beginning of time, this tension was felt. You guys ever heard of a dude named Abraham? Abraham has this moment with God. God looks at him and he says, I'm choosing you. You're my chosen dude. And out of your life, there's going to be such an inheritance. Your offspring are going to outnumber the stars in the sky and the sand on the ground. That was a pretty clarifying word for Abraham, wouldn't you think? That makes where he wants to be very, very clear. 13 years. 13 years he had to wait before the beginning of that promise was fulfilled. 13 years of mid-flight chaos, daily temptation to be overwhelmed with anxiety, fear, and discouragement because the promise of God that was clearly spoken to him, his destiny, that kind of moment that you have when you know what you want to do, you know where you want to be, that moment happened to Abraham 13 years of mid-flight chaos before the beginning of that promise was fulfilled. What about Joseph? Right? Joseph, guy in the Bible, his brothers sell him into slavery. Joseph has these crazy dreams of sheaves and people bowing down to sheaves. And he goes to his brothers and he's like, look, you're going to bow down to me. And his brothers said, hell yeah, watch this. I'm going to throw you in a hole. And then they sell him into slavery because they're like, let's not just kill him. Let's make a little money on top of that. And so they, throw him, they get some money for him. He goes into slavery. Then he interprets a dream. He ends up kind of serving Potiphar, and Potiphar's this huge dude in Egypt, and then he's living in Potiphar's house, and then all of a sudden Potiphar's wife has the hots for him and then frames him. She's super crazy, sketchy lady, and so David runs out of the house, but he's running so fast he drops his jacket, and then Potiphar's wife picks it up, and she's like, look, he wanted to sleep with me, he left his jacket, and then Potiphar was like, you're going to prison, and so all of a sudden Joseph is in prison, and he's in prison, and this dude, this cupbearer guy, is weird, he comes down, is like, I hold the cup, and Potiphar had a dream, and why don't you interpret dreams? You interpreted my dream, and then he goes, okay, well, I'll go interpret Potiphar's dream. He goes, the Potiphar's dream, boom, he's governor. Chaos, man, that's all kinds of chaos. That is serious mid-flight chaos. Dream of ruling and leading, slavery, prison, sketchy women, governor. I mean, that's chaos. What about David? I love David. Anybody love David? David's dude in the Bible. I love David in the Bible, man. David is I love reading about David because it makes me feel not so bad about me. Serious, you ever thinking that you're jacked up? David was jacked up. Now, they did not leave anything out. This is the unedited. Now, if they did edit the life of David, whoa. Be very encouraged. This dude had some serious issues. But he loved God. David made great decisions. David made bad decisions. But I want to look at one of the decisions that David did make because I think it gives us a key into actually how we live what Paul encouraged us to do in Philippians 4, which is to be anxious about nothing. Because honestly, if you're anything like me, I learned from seeing how people do it, not just hearing about it. And David found a way to be peaceful in chaos. 1 Samuel 30. It's this crazy story. David and his men are heading home. You see, David in 1 Samuel 16 actually was anointed king of Israel. That would be a pretty clarifying moment. That would be this is where I want to be sign in the road. Dave, you're going to be king of Israel, but we don't see him thrown into leadership. We don't see him moving into the palace and starting to wear big rings and gold chains and flat-billed hats sideways. We don't see any of that. We don't see him change his hairstyle and all of a sudden, get sleeve tattoos and drive yellow Lamborghinis at night in Miami and get arrested. For those of you who don't do any pop news, you have no idea I'm talking about Justin Bieber, and you should be proud of yourself. But that's not what happened. Dave didn't just go from nothing to stardom. He didn't have this YouTube experience. Dave went out and he actually killed Goliath. He did the stuff. He was anointed king. He then goes and does kingly things by defending his people. And now he's on the run. The current king, Saul, wants to see David dead because he is threatening his leadership. So David, the anointed king, where he wants to be, he knows what is in front of him. He knows what he's destined to become. And all of a sudden, he is on the run. Chaos. Mid-flight chaos. He's having to run for his life. Fast forward, we go to chapter 30. David aligns himself with his little militia that was, when we read about these guys that joined up with David, it says that they were disgruntled. How would you like that to be your first kind of band of brothers? So everybody here who has a tendency to complain a lot and to hate your leaders, come with me. That was David's first little crew. And so this militia that David kind of got together, aligned themselves with the Philistines. And they were getting ready at the beginning of chapter 30 to attack King Saul's army with the Philistine army. But right before that attack happened, the leaders of the Philistine army didn't really know what they thought about Dave yet. And so they said, hey, look, Dave, why don't you go home? You're making me a little nervous. Last time we hung out, you cut off one of my dude's heads. So surely you're going to turn on us when we get into the battle. This is a big trap. So why don't you go ahead and go home? So Dave and his militia are about 3 days away from their home city, and so they start the journey home. And on this journey home, I'm sure that they were excited to see their wives and their kids. You know, when I come home from just a regular work day, my kids form tackle me. You know, I mean, I can't even get in the door without them coming to get me. I'm about to cough so hard. I tried. It's not over yet. Sorry. Wow. I'm not convinced it's over yet, so it might come back. What was I talking about? You're going to hug your kids. So David and his guys are probably fired up to go see their kids. You know what I'm saying? They're excited to see their families. And my kids form tackle me when I come home. So I'm sure they were in a habit of when they would make the walk home, when they would come into view, that all of the kids in the village would drop what they were doing and run to go see their dads. I'm sure that's what would have happened. That's what my kids would have done. As soon as they would see a group of people walking and they knew that dad was in that group of people, they're going to run down that road and they're going to go find dad and they're going to hug dad because they hadn't seen him in months. But as they made the bend, probably expecting to hear the sounds of kids running up the street and playing, they didn't hear that. They actually saw something very different. They saw smoke coming up from the horizon. Smoke was billowing from their city. And I'm sure that the unknown horror of what was awaiting them caused this absolutely disruption of the formed ranks that they were marching in on. I'm sure it all fell apart, and they just started running to see what in the world was going on in their town. And their unknown horror was met face to face with real horror, when they saw that their wives were gone, their kids were gone, and all of their homes were burned. And then we come to this verse. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because his sons and his daughters, but David found strength in the Lord his God. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. These guys are not just any guys, these are his guys. These guys he fought with. These guys he believed in when no one else believed in him. So not only is he feeling the pain of loss of his family, I mean, he's feeling the pain of rejection from his team. David was experiencing chaos. In this moment, there was all kinds of chaos happening. He had the promise of God in front of him that one day he will be the king of Israel. And now the men that God had given him to see that come to pass were threatening to kill him. And he was overwhelmed, he was discouraged, he was anxious, he was fearful. But he didn't respond like his men responded. It says his men were bitter in spirit because of their sons and their daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. Isn't it interesting that when we get into the mid-flight chaos, we really only respond one of two ways? You either press in, you lean into God, or you blame everyone and him and everybody above you for your pain. Because the chaos tempts us to want to blame everybody for the lack of foundation that we're experiencing. It's got to be your fault. It must be your fault that I'm flying through the air and I don't know which way is up anymore, and this landing is going to be painful. It's you. But David doesn't do that. It says that David found strength in God. So what did that look like? I think very easily we could put it in Philippians 4, 6, and 7 language. I think David said, God, I don't want to be anxious about anything. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, I want to thank you for who you are and let you know that I need you right now. And then God did what God does. And it says the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. You have to understand, when you lean into the living God in the middle of your chaos, you become clear that God is bigger than your chaos. And when you begin to understand that God is bigger than your chaos, you begin to understand that his peace that doesn't make sense that you should experience is the natural response of the human heart in the arms of the God who is big enough to grab hold of you and your chaos and say, guess what? You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. If we were to read on in 1 Samuel, we get to verse 18. And it says that David recovered all that had been stolen. David recovered all that had been stolen. Listen to me. Listen. David found strength in God, looked at his men, and won their hearts. And they went and found the Amalekites. And they went rated R on them. Heads falling off and stuff. It's crazy, crazy stuff. And David recovered all that had been stolen. Here's what I want you to understand tonight. Sometimes in the mid-flight chaos, it can begin to feel that where you want to be is getting stolen from you. It's being taken. It's being moved. They're moving the goalpost on you. You can't get there anymore. You don't even understand how in the world you would get there. Because in this place right here, everything is making you hate even the direction that you're going because of the discouragement and the fear that you're experiencing. Now, what would it look like, though, that if all of us, no matter what your chaotic space is, all of us pressed into the God who is bigger than our chaos and leaned in to the God who is bigger than our chaos. And we got the word from God for the chaos that would bring the peace that transcends all understanding in our hearts and our minds. I love how it says, and it will guard your heart and your mind. You see, in the middle of the chaos, peace isn't a feeling. Peace isn't an emotion. Peace is a person. And that person is Jesus. I don't know what your chaos is tonight. I have no idea what your mid-flight chaos is, but I know that you're in it because you're human. And there's not one of us that is sitting in this room that does not have an aspect of our lives that feels chaotic. And we're tempted to flail our arms and to kick our legs and to wonder, am I ever going to hit the ground? And if I do hit the ground, am I going to survive? And God is saying to us, I want to give you peace that surpasses all understanding. And it's going to guard your heart. And it's going to guard your mind. And it's going to allow you to experience the purpose of the season. You're not just going to have to survive the season. Your in-between place is going to go from chaos to a peace in the between. And the anxiety and the discouragement and the fear that you feel is going to be transformed into a peace that transcends all of your wildest dreams. Because if you lean into God, if you lean in, just like David leaned in. David found strength in God. He leaned in. He got the word from God. God, what do I do? Remind me who I am. Tell me how I'm going to make it. And in that moment, not only did he get clear about what he was to do next, he was able to find strength in a place where practically he shouldn't have. Could it be possible that we could live without anxiousness this side of heaven? Could it be possible that we learn to thrive in the space between? Because we're leaning into the God who's bigger than the chaos that tries to steal our joy.